tidings to you out there, and thanks for tuning in. This is the third of our podcasts, third of a weekly series to discuss the Lewis and Clark expedition. The focus will be on the journal entries for the current week to illuminate our listeners as to where the Corps of Discovery is and what they're doing at this time, whether it be 1804, 1805, or 1806, the years of the expedition as it set out and returned to St. Louis. Occasionally events in 1803 and before will be discussed, as will events after the return, 1806 and beyond. The language used in this podcast assumes that the listener tuned into prior podcasts and thus has some background information in mind. This podcast is being produced and presented by the Missouri River Basin Lewis and Clark Interpretive Trail and Visitor Center in Nebraska City, Nebraska. You can find us on Facebook by searching MRB Lewis and Clark Center, and check out our website at lewisandclarkvisitorscenter.org. We are located along the Missouri River, along the route of the expedition. We have 3 floors of Lewis and Clark themed exhibits, walking trails, and a Plains Indian Earth Lodge replica. This week, August 15th to the 21st, it's just jam-packed with stuff to talk about. All 3 years of the journals just come to life when read, and each year is distinctly notable for different reasons. And that's really what makes the journal so interesting to look at and compare and contrast year by year just what's going on for the Corps. If we did not have these journals, these detailed journals, so much would not be known about the expedition. And indeed, the essence of each day, that is to say, the experience felt at that moment, would be nearly 100% lost to us. August 15th to August 21st, 1804. The Corps, a couple of miles east of present-day Homer, Nebraska, headed up the Missouri River to about 5 miles east of modern-day Ponca, Nebraska. From August 13th to August 19th, the Corps camped on the Nebraska side of the river at a site that Clark called Fish Camp. They were trying to make contact with the Omaha village, and they were also waiting for the party that was dispatched to find the presumed deserter, Moses Reed. The Omaha village was empty. The inhabitants were presumed to be west hunting the buffalo herds. On August 15th, Patrick Gass writes in his journal, "This day Sergeant Floyd became very sick and remained so all night. He was seized with a complaint somewhat like a violent colic." This is the first mention by anyone that Floyd was not well, and his ailment would continue. On the same day, Joseph Whitehouse in his journal writes that Captain Clark and some men caught 386 fish in a pond near the river, and they caught about 800 the following day. So the fishing was good. The fishing was very, very good. I would take that any day. On August 18th, the party that was sent to find the deserters had returned. With them was Private Moses B. Reed, who had indeed deserted, and he confessed to it. The hired hand, the French engagé La Liberté, was also caught at that time. However, he had somehow managed to escape. Clark writes that he was caught, but deceived the party and got away. And with that, La Liberté vanishes into history. A couple of men named the same or similar name or similar aliases died in Missouri, one in 1820 and one in 1837. It is possible, and perhaps likely, that one of these men was our La Liberté. As for Moses Reed, Clark writes, "We proceeded to the trial of Reed. He confessed that he deserted and stole a public rifle, shot, pouch, powder, and balls, and requested that we would be as favorable with him as we could consistently with our oaths, which we were, and only sentenced him to run the gauntlet 4 times through the party, and that each man with 9 switches should punish him, and for him not to be considered in the future as one of our party. Little more is known of the proceeding and the carrying out of the punishment, and Reed is not mentioned again in the journals until August 12th of that year. When Clark says that he will no longer be considered part of the party, that implies that he would be sent back to St. Louis as soon as would be advantageous. And Reed was definitely aboard the keelboat when it was sent back to St. Louis in early April 1805, and then he too disappears into history. I'd like to share Charles Floyd's August 18th journal entry. Saturday, August 18th. Our men returned and brought with them the man, and brought with them the grand chief of the Odos, and 2 lower chiefs, and 6 lower youths of the nation. It was the last journal entry made by Charles Floyd. On August 20th, William Clark writes, Sergeant Floyd, as bad as he can be, no pulse, and nothing will stay a moment on his stomach or bowels. Past 2 islands on the starboard side, at First Bluff on the starboard side, Sergeant Floyd died with a great deal of composure. Before his death he said to me, I'm going away. I want you to write me a letter. John Ordway wrote, He was laid out in the best possible manner. We proceeded on to the first hill's northern side. There we dug the grave on a handsomely, sightly rounded knob close to the bank. We buried him with the honors of war, the usual ceremony performed by Captain Lewis. In regards to the care Floyd received in his final days, Patrick Gass writes, Here Sergeant Floyd died, notwithstanding every possible effort was made by the commanding officers and other persons to save his life. Joseph Whitehouse adds that at this point that Sergeant Floyd was buried, we named this hill Sergeant Floyd's Bluff. We proceeded on to a creek lying on the same side of the river, which we named Sergeant Floyd's Creek, and encamped there. Sadly, there are no surviving journal entries on this day made by Meriwether Lewis. The chances are great that Charles Floyd died from a burst appendix, complications from it. Even if he was back east at the time being treated by top physicians of the day, he still would have succumbed. It wasn't until about 80 years later that surgical treatment emerged to successfully combat the appendicitis ailment. Floyd was the first of the expedition to die. Due to the shifting nature of the Missouri River, with its awesome power to create and destroy bluffs along its banks, his gravesite was forced to be moved several times until 1901, when the remains were moved to a high point, a safe point, where they were interred there and remain at this spot to the day. On Memorial Day in 1901, a 100-foot tall sandstone obelisk was dedicated at the site. It is one of the tallest obelisks in the United States. It is easily accessible and can be seen from Interstate 29 on the south side of present-day Sioux City, Iowa. August 15th to August 21st, 1805. Camped mostly at the aptly named Camp Fortunate near modern-day Clark Canyon Reservoir, Montana. The Corps spends 6 days here for a couple of reasons. First, to get to know the Shoshone, and secondly, to await the arrival of Clark's group, which was a couple days' journey behind them, headed their way. Lewis was trying to convince some of the Shoshone to go with him in the direction of Clark's party. The Shoshone were cautious, indeed very cautious, and thought that it might be a trap. Lewis finally convinces some of them to accompany him. The morning of August 17th, Clark's group is met by Lewis's group and the Shoshone that accompanied. What happens next is one of the many lucky moments of the expedition. As Lewis writes, shortly after Captain Clark arrived with the interpreter Charbonneau in Sakakawea, who proved to be a sister of the chief Kamehameha. The meeting of those people was really affecting. These were Sacagawea's people, and the chief Kamehameha was a relation of hers. What a stroke of luck. Just imagine the sudden ease of tension and happy moments that would follow. However, translating must still have been time-consuming and difficult. Get this. The order of the translation went like this. The captains would speak English to Labiche. Labiche would speak French to Charbonneau. Charbonneau would speak Hidatsa to Sakakawea, and Sakakawea would speak Shoshone to Kamehameha. Wow, right? But by all accounts, the negotiations appear to have went smoothly thereafter, and the Shoshone agreed to let the expedition use its horses. On August 18th, Lewis purchased 3 horses, for which I gave a uniform coat, a pair of leggings, a few handkerchiefs, 3 knives, and some other small articles, the whole of which did not cost me more than $20 in the United States. The Indians seemed quite pleased with the bargain, as I was. On 21st August, Clark was scouting ahead and writes that there was frost the previous night. August was nearing its end, and they still had to get over the mountains. But by now they had horses and they had guides. You know, the wisdom to add Charbonneau to the party the previous winter at Fort Mandan really showed itself this week. Things with the Shoshone went smoothly. The time with the Shoshone are some of the longest journal entries, and there's so much more that could be discussed. I mean, just imagine if they didn't have Charbonneau and more specifically Sakakawea to translate, and also to be a female with a baby with the group, and also to be related to this these individuals in this tribe. It's really just key timing that could not have gone any better for them. August 15th to August 21st, 1806. The Corps started the week in central North Dakota at the Mandan villages and finished the week in northern South Dakota near the modern-day city of Pollock. On August 15th, while at the Mandan village, the captains extended invitation for Mandan chiefs to return with them and meet with their new great father, President Jefferson. Clark wrote in his journal that the great chief of the Minnetarees spoke. He said he wished to go down and see his great father very much, but that the Sioux were in the road and would most certainly kill him or any others who should go down. They were bad people and would not listen to anything which was told them. The Sioux had killed 8 of their people and stole a number of their horses recently. A flashback to 1804, which we have not yet discussed because it has not yet happened chronologically. The Corps had probably its most tense days of all on the entire expedition among any of the native tribes, with their experience of the Teton Sioux on the way up the Missouri in 1804. And we will go into that into great detail into upcoming podcasts soon, I promise. So the chief of the Minnetarees was warning that the Teton Sioux were still showing hostility. It must have been a bit distressing, although to the captains, it probably expected or largely presumed, knowing the band's pedigree and having experienced them firsthand in 1804 on their way up. But the captains, they tried to continually interview and recruit a chief or multiple chiefs to come with them to meet the president. Finally, late on the 16th, a Mandan chief named Sheheka agreed to go with them if they would also take his wife and children. The captains agreed. Around this time, Private John Coulter, a valued member of the expedition, expressed a desire to leave the party here so that he could fur trap the upper Missouri. His request was granted by the captains, who settled up with him, and he was given some excess items that the expedition could part with and no longer needed. The party had bonded to such an extent and as a cohesive unit over the previous 26 months, they had lost a member, and it's very easy to infer in Clark's journal entry that he was already missed at this time. It seems likely that at this time feelings of overall conclusion, it must have been starting to be felt. They knew that they would be back in St. Louis relatively soon, and that the party would dissolve and go their separate ways into American history. On August 17th, 3 more members of the party went their separate ways, as was planned. The captain settled with Toussaint Charbonneau for $500 and 33 1/3 cents. In his journal on that day, Clark writes, in regard to the parting with Charbonneau, "I offered to take his little son, a beautiful, promising child who was 19 months old, to which they both, himself and his wife, were willing, providing that the child had been weaned. They observed that in 1 year the boy would be sufficiently old to leave his mother, and he would then take him to me if I would be so friendly as to raise the child for him in such a manner as I thought proper, to which I agreed." That's just really something. What a noble gesture, and an affectionate one. We'll talk more about little Pompey, as Clark called him, more on him in the future podcasts. But the next day they set out. They were entering Sioux country, the last foreseen obstacle of the journey. Their encounters with the Sioux were far from over. Tune in over the next coming weeks to hear how the encounters go, as well as the original 1804 encounters with the Sioux on their journey up the Missouri River. Today's quote of the week this week is once again a Thomas Jefferson quote, this one from 1801 at his first presidential inauguration. "Peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none." Thanks again for listening to our podcast. We hope that you will subscribe to our YouTube page and tune in once again. Until then.